Everybody, welcome to the first video of the semester where we will be talking about all of the key terms and important things from this chapter and doing some examples. We are focusing on some definitions that are really important in our course. The first is population and the second is sample. Population doesn't just refer to, let's say, people in a city or a country. The population refers to a group of individuals or items of which we want to study. And then a sample comes from within that population. So for instance, let's say I'm talking about calculators. I have Texas Instruments calculators. Now, I could talk about all of the calculators at Best Buy. I could talk about all of the Texas Instruments calculators at Best Buy. I could talk about all of the Texas Instruments calculators produced. I could get specific to the type of calculator. Maybe it's an 83, maybe it's an 84. There's many different ways that you can define the population, but you need to be specific. And when you are choosing the sample, your sample needs to be specific from that population. So for example, let's say I was talking about all Texas Instruments calculators from Best Buys in North America. And then my sample could be 100 Texas Instruments calculators and Best Buys in North America. So the key characteristics that were in the population also need to be represented in your sample. And using words like all and giving numbers are very important when you're establishing population and sample. From the sample and from the population, we can maybe analyze maybe a variable. So a variable is a characteristic about something that you're talking about in the population. So for instance, I could be talking about the price of these calculators. The variable that I'm measuring would be the price. And if I calculated the price for those 100 calculators in my sample, that would be a statistic. If I was to talk about the price of all of the calculators that I defined in my population, that would be a parameter. So the way to determine whether a population, which one goes with which, the population starts with P and so does parameter. And so parameter refers to a population variable value. And statistic refers to the sample. Okay, so just think about population goes with parameter and statistic goes with sample. So when you're asked to define a parameter or define the statistic, you need to be thinking sample versus population. Okay, so those are some key definitions that we're working with. Now let's look at an example where we are to define or pick from the problem, what is the population, what is the sample, and so on. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, use the following information to answer the next 5 exercises. Studies are often done by pharmaceutical companies to determine the effectiveness of a treatment program. And suppose that a new drug is currently under study to address a respiratory virus. It is given to patients once the patient exhibits symptoms of the virus. Of interest is the average mean length of time in days from the time the patient starts the treatment until the symptoms are alleviated. 2 researchers each follow a different set of 40 patients with a respiratory virus from the start of treatment until the symptoms are alleviated. The following data and days are collected. We have researcher A with some numbers and researcher B with some numbers. So we want to determine the key terms, and we're going to refer to the example regarding researcher A. So we want to know what the population is, what the sample is, the parameter, the statistic, and also the variable. So what is the overall group? What is the sample that came from that overall group? What is the population variable characteristic? What is the sample variable characteristic? And what is the variable itself? Looking back at the information that we were given, we are talking about a drug that is currently under study to address a respiratory virus, and it is given to patients once the patient exhibits symptoms of the virus. So the population that we are talking about is patients with the virus. Now, the second question asks us about the sample. Our sample needs to come from those patients with the virus, but this question specifically asked about researcher A, and we note that each of the researchers were given 40 patients with the virus. So we are talking about the 40 patients that researcher A had with the virus. Now, the parameter is that characteristic value that refers to the population. So what is the population that we're looking at? Well, we do know that of interest is the average or mean length of time in days from the time the patient starts the treatment until the symptoms are alleviated. The statistic specifically refers to the 40 patients. So this would be the average length in days until the 40 patient symptoms are alleviated. Now, the variable is the length of time in days that the patient lives with the virus until the symptoms are alleviated. If you notice, 3, 4, and 5 seem very similar. We're talking about average length. The difference is parameter says the average length until the patient's symptoms are alleviated. Statistic refers to the sample of the 40 patients, and then the variable does not refer average. So the parameter and the statistic are talking about the average of the groups, so the total average of the entire population of patient symptoms versus the smaller 40, and then the variable itself is the length of time. So there's a difference between each of these three. Hopefully this was helpful. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to create a frequency distribution using relative frequency in addition to raw frequency with the same problem.